Shalom. I'm Heath Hayes. Today is day 106 of Read the Bible in a Year, and we're in 2 Kings, starting up 2 Kings on page 381 in the scriptures, if you want to follow along or there around about. 2 Kings. So this is where we're getting into more of Elijah. It's going to be some good stuff here. Anyways, we're going to read chapters 1 through 4. 2 Kings chapter 1. Wait, coffee. I needed that. I'm very tired this morning, but that's okay. I'm sure you are too. If you're watching this in the morning, and of course, it'll probably be about 8 a.m. before this actually posts because that's how slow the internet is. But with that said, it is what it is. Chapter 1. And Moab revolted against Israel after the death of Ahab, and Ahaziah fell through the lattice of his upper room in Shomeron and was injured, and sent messengers and said to them, Go inquire of Baal-zebub, the mighty one of Ekron, and I shall recover from this injury. But the messenger of Yahweh spoke to Elijah the Tishbite, Rise up and go meet the messengers of the sovereign of Shomeron, and say to them, Is it because there is no Elohim in Israel that you are going to inquire of Baal-zebub, the mighty one of Ekron? So therefore, thus said Yahweh, You are not going to get out of bed to which you have gone up, for you shall certainly die. And Elijah went. And the messengers returned to him, and he said to them, Why have you come back? And they said to him, A man came to meet us and said to us, Go, return to the sovereign who sent you, and say to him, Thus said Yahweh, Is it because there is no Elohim in Israel that you are sending to inquire of Baal-zebub, the mighty one of Ekron? Therefore you are not going to get out of the bed to which you have gone up, for you shall certainly die. And he said to them, What was the man like who came up to meet you and to speak these words? And they answered him, He was a hairy man, and he wore a leather girdle around his waist. And he said, It is Elijah the Tishbite. He then sent him a captain of 50 with his 50 men, and he went up to him, and see, he was sitting at the top of a hill, and he spoke to him, Man of Elohim, the sovereign has said, Come down. And Elijah answered and said to the captain of 50, If I am a man of Elohim, let fire come down from the heavens, and consume you and your 50 men. And fire came down from the heavens, and consumed him and his 50. He then sent another captain of 50 with his 50 men and him. And he answered and said to him, Man of Elohim, this is what the sovereign said, Come down at once. And Elijah answered and said to them, If I am a man of Elohim, let fire come down from the heavens and consume you and your 50 men. And the fire of Elohim came down from the heavens and consumed him and his 50 men. And again he sent a third captain of 50 with his 50 men, and the third captain of 50 went up and came and fell on his knees before Elijah and pleaded with him, and said to him, Man of Elohim, please let my life and the life of these 50 servants of yours be precious in your eyes. See, fire has come down from the heavens and burned up the first 2 captains of 50s with their 50s, but let my life be precious in your eyes. And the messenger of Yahweh said to Elijah, Go down with him. Do not be afraid of him. So he rose up and went down with him to the sovereign, and spoke to him. Thus said Yahweh, because you have sent messengers to inquire of Baal-zebub, the mighty one of Ekron, is it because there is no Elohim in Israel to inquire of his word? Therefore you are not going to get out of bed to which you have gone up, for you shall certainly die. And he died, according to the word of Yahweh which Elijah had spoken. And Jehoram reigned in his place. In the 2nd year of Jehoram, son of Jehoshaphat, sovereign of Judah, for he had no son. And the rest of the acts of Ahazyahu, which he did, are they not written in? Turning the page, sticky pages, all right. Written in the book of the Annals of the Sovereigns of Israel, chapter 2. And it came to be when Yahweh was taking up Elijah to the heavens by a whirlwind, that Elijah went with Elisha from Gilgal, and Elijah said to Elisha, please remain here, for Yahweh sent me on to Bethel. And Elisha said, as Yahweh lives, and as your being lives, I do not leave you. And they went down to Bethel, and the sons of the prophets who were at Bethel came out to Elisha and said to him, do you know that Yahweh is taking away your master from your head? And he said, I also know. Be silent. And Elijah said to him, Elisha, please remain here, for Yahweh has sent me on to Jericho. And he said, as Yahweh lives, and as your being lives, I do not leave you. And they came into Jericho. And the sons of the prophets who were at Jericho came to Elisha and said to him, do you know that Yahweh has taken away your prophets from over you today? And he said, I also know. Be silent. And Elijah said to him, please remain here, for Yahweh has sent me on to the Jordan. And he said, as Yahweh lives, and as your being lives, I do not leave you. And the two of them went on, and 50 men of the sons of the prophets went and stood facing them at a distance, while the two of them stood by the Jordan. And Elijah took his mantle and rolled it up and struck the water, and it was divided this way and that, so that the two of them passed over on dry ground. And it came to be, when they had passed over, that Elijah said to Elisha, ask what I am to do for you before I am taken away from you. And Elisha said, please let a double portion of your spirit be upon me. And he said, you have made it hard to ask, yet if you see me when I am taken from you, it is yours. But if not, it is not. And it came to be, as they continued on and spoke, that see, a chariot of fire with horses of fire, which separated the two of them. And Elijah went up by whirlwind into the heavens. And Elisha saw it, and he cried out, my father, the chariot of Israel and its horsemen. And he saw him no more. Then he took hold of his garment, tore them into 2 pieces, and he took up the mantle of Elijah that had fallen from him, and went back and stood by the bank of the Jordan. And he took the mantle of Elijah that had fallen from him, and struck the water, and said, where is Yahweh Elohim of Elijah? And he struck the water, and it was divided this way and that, and Elisha passed over. And when the sons of the prophets who were from Jericho saw him, they said, the spirit of Eliyahu rests on Elijah. The spirit of Eliyahu rests on Elisha. And they came to meet him and bowed to the ground before him. And they said to him, Look, there are 50 strong men with your servants. Please let them go and search for your master, lest the Spirit of Yahweh has taken him up and cast him upon some mountain or into some valley. And he said, Send no one. But they pressed him until he was ashamed. And he said, Send. So they sent 50 men, and they searched for 3 days, but did not find him. And they returned to him, for he remained in Jericho. And he said to them, Did I not say to you, Do not go? And the men of the city said to Elisha, Look, the site of this city is good, as my master sees, but the waters are spoilt, and the soil barren. And he said, Bring me a new bowl, and put salt in it. And they brought it to him. And he went out to the source of the water, and threw salt in there, and said, Thus said Yahweh, I have healed this water. No longer shall death or barrenness come from it. And the waters were healed to this day, according to the word of Elisha, which he spoke. And he went up from there to Bethel. Praise Yah. And as he was going up the way, some youths came from the city and mocked him and said to him, Go up, bald head, go up, bald head. And he turned around and looked at them and pronounced a curse on them in the name of Yahweh. And 2 female bears came out from the forest and tore them to pieces, 42 of the youths. And from there he went to Mount Carmel, and from there he returned to Shomeron. Man, there's so much there. Just between the 2 prophets, Elijah and Elisha. I want you to understand that they had an expectancy. This entire idea that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things that are unseen. There's so much written right here, just in those first 2 chapters. And even further along, whenever Elijah, or beforehand, whenever Elijah calls down fire to consume the altar, and then he strikes down 450 prophets of Baal. Yeah, expectancy. They knew it. And see, the authority that what you have to understand is that same spirit, that double portion that Elisha asked for, that he had an expectation for, and then he said, Where is the God of Elohim? Or where is the God of Elijah the prophet? Slaps the water and it, like Moses, right? And he walks across the water on dry ground. That very same spirit, that very same double portion rests on you. And it was only afforded to mankind through the death, burial, and resurrection, that giving of the free gift that the Father did through his Son, Yeshua, our Messiah. You have that. And I'll go so much further to say that greater things shall you do, just like Yeshua said. You will do greater things than he, simply because he sits at the right hand of the Father and he is interceding on your behalf day and night. And because of that, you have the Spirit of the Most High Living God within you. You have authority. I have authority in the Spirit. So much that you could say to the lame, walk. You could say to the blind, see. You could say to the dead, rise. All things that Yeshua did, and he said we would do greater than that if you would just believe. You have that same spirit that Elisha has. You have it. You can righteously pronounce cursing. I don't recommend it, because you have to not be in error. But you can stand in righteousness and in truth, according to the word of the Most High, and operate in the Spirit. You have that Spirit. You just need to know it. Coffee. The Father desires those who worship Him to worship Him in spirit and in truth. It's John chapter 4. But we're not in John chapter 4. We are now in 2 Kings chapter 3. All right. So Elisha is freaking awesome. Elijah was awesome. But Elisha is awesomer. Or something like that. I don't know. Anyways. Chapter 3. And Jehoram, son of Ahab, began to reign over Israel at Shomeron in the 18th year of Jehoshaphat, sovereign of Judah, and reigned 12 years. And naturally, he did evil in the eyes of Yahweh, but not like his father and mother. For he removed the statue of Baal, which his father had made. But he clung to the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, who had made Israel sin. He did not turn away from them. And Mesha, sovereign of Moab, was a sheep breeder, and he paid the sovereign of Israel 100,000 lambs and the wool of 100,000 rams. And it came to be when Ahab died that the sovereign of Moab revolted against the sovereign of Israel, and sovereign Jehoram went out of Shomeron at that time and mustered all Israel. And he went and sent Jehoshaphat, sovereign of Judah, to the sovereign of Moab, saying, the sovereign of Moab has revolted against me. Do you go with me to fight against Moab? And he said, I go up. I am as you are, my people as your people, my horses as your horses. And he said, by which way do we go up? And he said, by the way of the wilderness of Edom. And the sovereign of Israel went, and the sovereign of Judah, and the sovereign of Edom, and went round a journey of 7 days, and there was no water for the army, nor for the cattle that followed them. And the sovereign of Israel said, what? Has Yahweh called these 3 sovereigns to give them into the hand of Moab? And Jehoshaphat said, is there no prophet of Yahweh here? Then let us inquire of Yahweh through him. One of the servants of the sovereign of Israel then answered and said, Elisha, son of Shaphat, is here, who poured water out on the hands of Elijah. And Jehoshaphat said, the word of Yahweh is with him. And the sovereign of Israel and Jehoshaphat and the sovereign of Edom went down to him. And Elisha said to the sovereign of Israel, what have I to do with you? Go to the prophets of your father and the prophets of your mother. And the sovereign of Israel said to him, no, for Yahweh has called these 3 sovereigns to give them into the hand of Moab. And Elisha said, as Yahweh of hosts lives, before whom I stand, if it were not that I regard the presence of Jehoshaphat, sovereign of Judah, I would not look at you nor see you. And now bring me a harpist. And it came to be when the harpist played that the hand of Yahweh came upon him, and he said, thus said Yahweh, make these wadi ditches. For thus said Yahweh, you are not going to see wind nor rain, Yet that wadi is to be filled with water, so that you, your cattle, and your beasts shall drink. And this shall be but a light matter in the eyes of Yahweh, and he shall give Moab into your hand, and you shall strike every walled city, and every choice city, and shall cut down every good tree, and stop up every fountain of water, and ruin every good piece of land with stones. And it came to be in the morning, when the grain offering was offered, that see, water came by the way of Edom, and the land was filled with water. And when all Moab heard that the sovereigns had come up to fight against them, all who were able to bear arms and older were gathered, and they stood at the border. And they rose up early in the morning, and the sun was shining on the water, and the Moabites saw the water on the other side as red as blood. And they said, "This is blood. The sovereigns have indeed struck swords and have killed one another. And now Moab to the spoil." And they came to the camp of Israel, and Israel rose up and struck the Moabites, so that they fled before them, and striking, they struck the Moabites. And they broke down the cities, and each man threw a stone on every good piece of land and filled it. And they stopped up all the fountains of water and cut down all the good trees until only stones of Kir Hareseth was left. And the slingers went around and struck it. And when the sovereigns of Moab saw that the battle was too strong for him, he took with him 700 men who drew swords to break through to the sovereign of Edom, but they could not. Then took his eldest son, who would have reigned in his place, and offered him as an ascending offering upon the wall. And there was a great wrath against Israel, and they left him and returned to the land. Wow. Offered his own son as an ascending offering. I'm missing the content. When the sovereign of Moab saw the battle was too strong for him, he took with him 700 men who drew swords to break through the sovereign of Edom, but they could not. Then took his eldest son, the sovereign of Moab took his eldest son, who would have reigned in his place, and offered him in his... Okay, so he was offering an ascending offering upon the wall. So he was doing an ascending offering to a false god. The sovereign of Moab. Chapter 4. And a certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets cried out to Elisha, saying, "Your servant, my husband, is dead. And you know that your servant feared Yahweh, and the lender has come to take my 2 sons to be his slaves." And Elisha said to her, "What should I do for you? Inform me, what do you have in the house?" And she said, Your female servant has none at all in the house except a pot of oil. And he said, "Go, borrow vessels from everywhere, from all your neighbors, empty vessels. Do not get a few. And when you have come in, you shall shut the door behind you, and you shall shut the door behind you and your sons, and then pour it into all those vessels." So she went from him and shut the door behind her and her sons, who brought the vessels to her, and she poured it out. And it came to be, when the vessels were filled, that she said to her son, Bring me another vessel. But he said to her, There is not another vessel, and the oil had ceased. So she went and informed the man of Elohim and said, Go, sell the oil and pay your debt, and you and your sons live on the rest. Hot dog. Good night. Verse 8, And it came to be on a day that Elisha went to Shunem, where there was a prominent woman. She took hold of him to eat some food. And it came to be, as often as he passed by, that he turned in there to eat some food. And she said to her husband, Look, I know that this is the set-apart man of Elohim who passes by us continually. Please let us make a small upper room on the wall, and let us put a bed for him there, and a table, and a chair, and a lampstand. And it shall be, whenever he comes to us, let him turn in there. And it came to be on a day that he came there, he turned in to the upper room and lay down there. And he said to Gehazi his servant, Call this Shunammite woman. So he called her, and she stood before him. And he said to him, Please say to her, Look, you have gone to all this trouble for us. What is there to be done for you? Should I speak on your behalf to the sovereign, or to the commander of the army? And she answered, I am dwelling among my own people. And he said, What then is to be done for her? And Gehazi answered, Well, she has no son, and her husband is old. And he said, Call her. So he called her. And she stood in the doorway, and he said, About this appointed time next year you shall embrace a son. And she said, No, my master, man of Elohim, do not lie to your female servant. The desire of her heart. Don't lie to me, she's saying. And the woman conceived and bore a son when the appointed time had come, of which Elisha had spoken to her. And the child grew, and it came to be on a day that he went out to his father to the reapers. And he said to his father, My head, my head. And he said to his servant, Take him to his mother. So he took him and brought him to his mother, and he sat on her knees till noon and died. And she went up and laid him on the bed of the man of Elohim, and shut the door on him, and went out. And she called to her husband and said, Please send me one of the young men and one of the donkeys, so that I hurry to the man of Elohim and return. And he said, Why are you going to him today? So it is neither the new moon nor the Sabbath. And she said, It is well. And she saddled the donkey and said to her servant, Drive and go, do not slow down except I speak to you. And she went and came to the man of Elohim at Mount Carmel. And it came to be, when the man of Elohim saw her at a distance, that he said to his servant Gehazi, See the Shunammite woman. Please run now to meet her, and say to her, Is it well with you? Is it well with your husband? Is it well with the child? And she answered, It is well. And she came to the man of Elohim at the hill, and she took hold of him by the feet. But Gehazi came near to push her away. But the man of Elohim said, Leave her alone, for her being is bitter in her, and Yahweh has hidden it from me, and has not revealed it to me. And she said, Did I ask a son of my master? Did I not say, Do not deceive me? And he said to Gehazi, Gird up your loins, take my staff in your hand, and go. When you meet anyone, do not greet him. When anyone greets you, do not answer him. You shall lay my staff on the face of the child. And the mother of the child said, "As Yahweh lives, as your being lives, I do not leave you." And he rose and followed her, and Gehazi went on ahead of them and laid the staff on the face of the child. But there was no voice, there was no hearing, so he went back to meet him and reported to him, saying, "The child has not awakened." And Elisha came into the house and saw the child was dead, lying on his bed. And he went in and shut the door behind the two of them and prayed to Yahweh. And he went up to lay on the child and put his mouth on his mouth, and his eyes on his eyes, and his hands on his hands, and stretched himself out on the child, and the flesh of the child became warm. And he returned and walked back and forth in the house, then went up and stretched himself out on him, and the child sneezed 7 times, and the child opened his eyes. And he called Gehazi and said, "Call this Shunammite woman, or call this Shunammite." So he called her, and she came in to him and said, "Pick up your son." Then she went in and fell at his feet and bowed herself to the ground and picked up her son and went out. And Elisha returned to Gilgal, and scarcity of food was in the land. And the sons of the prophets were sitting before him. And he said to his servant, "Put on the large pot and cook stew for the sons of the prophets." And one went out to the field to gather plants, and found a wild vine, and gathered wild cucumbers from it, filling the skirt of his garment, and came and sliced them into a pot of stew, though they did not know what they were. They then served it to the men to eat, and it came to be as they were eating the stew, that they cried out and said, "O man of Elohim, there is death in the pot," and they were unable to eat it. And he said, "Then bring some flour." And he put it into the pot and said, "Serve it to the people to eat." And there was no evil matter in the pot. Now a man came from Baal Shalisha and brought the man of Elohim bread of the first fruits, 20 loaves of barley bread, and newly ripened grain in his knapsack. And he said, "Give it to the people to eat." And his servant said, "What? Do I set this before 100 men? And he said, "Give it to the people to eat, for thus said Yahweh, eat and have some left over." And he set it before them, and they ate and had some left over, according to the word of Yahweh. All right, there's 2 Kings 1 through 4. Shalom.